Our second speaker in this segment is Chris Stevens, who is Chief Executive Officer of Coda Minerals Limited.
Thank you very much for having us here today at the Battery Minerals Conference, and it's really a good mix of commodities in this session, from graphite to copper to lithium next. So sort of covering a good gamut there. I'm here obviously to talk about Coda Minerals, which is very much a company focused on copper and also cobalt, two minerals integral to this whole topic today. I'll summarize a little bit just at the start for those unfamiliar with the story. We listed about 18 months ago, so that was in October 2020. Feels like a lot longer than 18 months. And we really listed with 250,000 tons of contained copper equivalent in resources, an exploration dream, some good targets, and some fantastic ground. And over the last 18 months, we've had a drill rig turning pretty much 24/7. Most of the time, 2 drill rigs turning on various parts of the project. And I'm really pleased to say, exploration is challenging. You can't always change what's in the rocks. And especially when you are exploring deep undercover, it can be somewhat nerve-wracking. But we've turned that 250,000 tons into 1.1 million tons of contained copper equivalent in JORC indicator resources across this tenure. That's copper and cobalt. And that's just fantastic. It's a great place to be. We're very happy with that result. But also in June last year, we had a somewhat surprising, although not really when you consider where we're drilling, result in the iron oxide copper gold. So this is the deeper basement copper gold mineralization for which this area is so famous. That has been challenging, frustrating, stressful, exciting, and all of those things. And I'll talk to that a little bit as well today. So really 2 main focuses at Elizabeth Creek, very close together, copper cobalt and copper gold. And then the Cameron River project as well, which we've acquired since listing. And usually I run out of time because there's so much to talk about at Elizabeth Creek, but I will touch upon that today as well. Fantastic exploration for copper and gold in Queensland. Our focus is very simple. We believe very, very strongly in the future of copper. We believe it is integral to a low carbon future. And we believe that companies that explore more, find more, especially when that exploration is carefully cost controlled and risk assessed. In terms of corporate structure, we've kept things very tight, currently less than 100 million shares on issue. Share price around about 64 cents, market cap of around about $63 million. Strong cash balance, last announcement we put out, so since the quarterly was 11.3. And we're in the middle of a takeover offer at the moment for our partners Torrens Mining, who own currently 30% of the Elizabeth Creek project. This will take us to 100% ownership of Elizabeth Creek. It will also give us exposure to Torrens's interesting gold assets, which are located close to Fosterville in Victoria, and an even more fascinating one in PNG, where there's DeGrussa grade mineralization, outcropping, and no recent exploration. That's a work in progress. Focus remains unashamedly on Elizabeth Creek. This is really about putting that together. We're at 82%, I think, this morning, beneficial ownership. So I expect that to complete relatively soon. Core structure is pretty solid as well. We've got Sprott and Regal as substantials, and the chairman is the 3rd largest shareholder. Very involved and a very strong corporate guy. The chair, he's former chair of Deloitte Australia, so very strong corporate presence on our board. Colin Moorhead took PT Medeka to a multi-billion-dollar company. Robin Marshall just delivered the Gruyere project for Goldfields and Gold Road as chairman of the steering committee. Paul Hallam, Sandfire, FMG. These are people who have a lot of experience. Kudzai comes straight from Perseus, again with them for 10 years as they went from a minnow to a billion-dollar company. So we have a lot of experience on the board. These are serious people. We work very, very hard. The internal team is, I'd call, a nerd-heavy team of problem solvers and puzzlers and people who love to do what we do. Now, I'm going to pause very briefly. I'm not going to talk about the copper market for very long. There are people more knowledgeable than I am. And also, I have a slight suspicion about companies that spend 2/3 of a presentation talking about their market rather than their projects. However, it is worth dwelling just a little bit on the copper market here. 10,000-ish a ton spot. The forecasts are bizarre. They seem to be forecasting mostly staying well above 8,000, even at the lowest part. They diverge hugely as we go forward. A couple of quick things though. As an economist, we look at supply and demand. The demand is exciting. We're talking about EVs all day. I drive one, he drives one. They are the future. These are coming. And that part of the copper market, I think, is a little bit underbaked in truth. But it's also a relatively small amount of copper. The demand side is important, and you can't move for seeing these sort of Twitter memes about how much copper a wind turbine cable uses or how much more copper a Tesla uses than a Hilux or whatever. The really important thing here is the supply curve. It just isn't there. Over the next 10 years, they're forecasting a 6 million ton per annum deficit in copper. Just to put it into context, that's about $60 billion a year of deficit. That's 18 times the current lithium market and 10 times where the lithium market is forecast to be. Now, I'm not bagging lithium. I own more lithium stocks than most of my portfolio. And again, you're going to hear from JP from Galan in a moment, which is a fantastic company in my opinion. But copper seems to be hard yards at the moment. The 14 companies we compare ourselves to for EV over resource calcs, 100% of them have gone back this year on their market caps. Something's got to give. I'll leave you with that thought. Something has to give because the supply simply isn't there. And the next 10 years are going to be really interesting. Moving on to the project. Elizabeth Creek, 700 square kilometres of tenure in South Australia. We currently own 70%. I expect that the Torrens transaction should complete as we're moving well above 80% now in beneficial ownership, which will take us to 100% of a very important asset. Mixture of iron oxide copper gold, the deeper mineralisation for which this area is so famous, and sediment-hosted, strata-bound copper cobalt. I used to call it Zambian style, and too many people asked me why we're developing a project in Zambia, which got confusing. So this, make no mistake, is in South Australia. It is a form of mineralization that is very common in Central Europe and also in the DRC Zambian copper belt. And so it can be a confusing story, and let me try and explain what I mean. You've got two different deposits sitting right next to each other. Emmie Bluff, JORC, 2012 indicated resource, 43 million tons at 1.84%. Shaw and Partners, independent research, putting a buy target on Coda at $2.50 at the moment based on EV over resource calcs. Now, a lot of people do stand up here and say we are underrated, undervalued, a re-rate is coming. What I like to do is explain why. We think people have struggled to understand this in the context of the fascinating, exciting, and as I said, frustrating IOCG hole that we hit in June last year. The IOCG, that red gravity anomaly you see next to it, about 400 meters vertically and about 200 to 800 meters laterally, depending on where you measure from, is a very exciting target. You've got a thinner, 4.5 square kilometer lateral deposit sitting at 400 meters below the ground. And then deeper below that, you've got the earlier stage discovery. Current focus is twofold. And yes, you can have two focuses. The first is on taking the Emmie Bluff deposit through to demonstrating mineability, processability, delivering a scoping study, a solid, beautiful scoping study, I hope. We're very excited about this. We've been working on parts of this for 4 years now because I was involved in this project prior to listing. And that is expected this year. So in a world which is massively copper supply constrained, I firmly believe that Emmie Bluff will one day be a mine. And I think the market's struggling a little bit to understand it at the moment. Some of that's clearly our fault for not providing enough information to the market on mining and processing. That will be resolved this year as we finalize those studies. The copper gold beneath it, and this is the IOCG in plan view, this sort of thicker, deeper iron oxide copper gold deposit, fundamentally different form of mineralization, still copper gold versus copper cobalt silver. We hit this in June last year. We've put about 7 parent holes into this, all but 2 of them strongly mineralized. We've just hit something really interesting. We were previously interpreting this as a zonation from pyrite, effectively copper barren, to chalcopyrite, to bornite being the high-grade copper that is often the core of these deposits. Starting to run out of space, which was a little bit depressing, to be quite honest, in exploration terms, until we hit the most recent hole, hole 7. Market hasn't reacted to that, not sure why. This has opened up another bornite zone. This demonstrates that one of our working hypotheses, which is that this is multiple conduits of copper, is more than likely correct at this point. And that's very exciting for us. So watch this space. It's probably not easy to see, but in that white circle, we are pushing back into the bornite zone, more results coming. And again, in terms of grade, the thickness probably isn't quite there yet in this first zone. We're looking at additional zones, obviously, now. But the grades more than certainly are. Put it in context, Carapatina mines about 0.8% copper, and the resource is 0.57% copper. So you can see these intersects here. Many, well over 3%, are really up there, and that is very exciting. I've talked a bit about the Emmie Bluff resource. You can see it here in 3D, 1.1 million tons in total across the tenure. These sorts of things are always mine constrained. The really great news here for something relatively thin, underground, we're working currently on a base case of board pillar mining, should be relatively simple, is when you add the other deposits to it, Windabout and MG14, just about 40 Ks to the south on the same tenure, you start to see the beginnings of a really exciting integrated copper project taking shape. You've got open pit, shallowable, mostly free dig we're working on this basis, dune sand above Windabout, virtually no cover above MG14. And you've got another getting on for 20 million tons at 1.14% copper. These are good grades, they're good depths, they're good sizes. You add that to the additional 43 million tons at 1.84 equivalent, and the fact that this cobalt is in carolite, which is readily floatable, readily processable, starts to look really good. Work program going forward is very exciting. I keep saying that word, but it is. A lot of work happening between now and sort of the third quarter of the year, so just after sort of June, July, August, as everything starts coming together. Mining, processing, power, logistics, environmental. Again, in terms of logistics, the Stuart Highway is 10 Ks from MG14. Oz Minerals supply road with their power supply goes right across the tenure. And so we're really looking forward to delivering that. And Cameron River, I'll talk to briefly. I've just got a couple of minutes left before I summarize. Suddenly pivoting, South Australian copper to Queensland copper. Saw a presentation this morning. It's actually my second talk of the day. And the person after me was sort of saying, look, Queensland is really the place to be exploring. South Australia is really kind of an anomaly if you take Olympic Dam. He was forgetting Carapatina and Prominent Hill there, but anyway. Queensland is, again, a phenomenal place to be exploring for copper. You have to be a little bit careful in Queensland. I've seen, exciting Carnaby, hammer metals, genuine excitement there, and then some of the others chucking out rock chips left, right, and center from their projects. And I don't want to do anyone down, but you've got to be careful with rock chips. We can't find barren rocks to baseline from on this tenure, and that's not a joke. We're taking hundreds and hundreds of geochemical samples, and you just can't find stuff which isn't chock full of malachite. You have to be a little bit careful with supergene enrichment in this area. You trip over 30% rock chips. What you want to see is this penetrating. It needs to go to depth, and it needs to go and provide credible scale. And that is your problem in Queensland. South Australia, it's so deep undercover, it's hard work. Queensland is the opposite problem. You can find it, it has to penetrate down into depth. And so we believe we understand this. We believe we've got the right expectations for this area. And we're working with geologists who have 20 plus years experience exploring in the Isa area. Some really good targets, rock chips, great. Again, you've heard my views on rock chips. When you add that to geophysics, you can see here just in the center of this slide, this VTEM depth slice, massive anomaly here penetrating what looks like to depth, needs to be tested with a drill rig. That is not even our priority one target. It's just very, very good looking geophysics, to be frank with you. But we've got geochem, that's your rock chips and soil samples. We've got geophysics, we've got mapping. And that's, moving very well. So we'll be drilling there in August. Watch this space. ESG, I think Phil did an amazing job of talking to ESG. This is something that we also believe in very strongly. We're very passionate about. We've just been through an ESG audit ourselves. We believe that Aussie cobalt is very important to have. We believe copper is integral to an energy future. We're a little bit earlier stage, but we are certainly working through that. We walk the talk there. Just to summarize, why invest in Coda? We believe in exploration. We believe in the copper market. We've proven our exploration mettle. We've got an experienced board. And, we work very, very hard. And JP did tell me I had to mention that Coda also won an Oscar this year. It wasn't us, it was the children of deaf adults. But I was told to mention that as well. So in summary, we believe Coda is a fantastic name and a fantastic company. Thank you very much.